Well, again, good morning. And for those of you I haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Rachel, and I serve as the Next Gen pastor here at Cedarbrook. And I have to tell you, I absolutely love what I get to do because I get to work with a ton of different ages and different stages of life. But one of the questions I do get often is, what exactly is a Next Gen pastor? You know? And that's a fair question because it's likely different than what some of us may be familiar with, right? If you're here and you are familiar with church, you're likely familiar with this church structure that roughly started around the 1950s, where ministries were actually put into different sections. So then you started to have a children's ministry and a youth ministry and a college ministry and adult ministry. And every single one of those ministries has played a very important role in helping people grow in their faith. But over the last several years, several churches, including Cedarbrook, have begun adapting and changing and embracing something that's called the next generation model. And at its heart, it's actually really simple. We believe that we are strongest as a church when every generation helps every other generation follow Jesus. And we know that because we fully recognize that we all have something to learn and give to one another. So the next generation model is not about getting rid of those individual ministries. We need all those different things. It's about not seeing those ministries as separate destinations, but rather seeing them as pieces of this bigger mission of helping the next generation follow Jesus. And as we look through Scripture, we see on repeat that faith is passed from generation through people coming together and connecting. That's God's design. And in Deuteronomy, God tells his people to talk about him in everyday life. And in Psalm 78, one generation is told to proclaim the good news of God to the next. And then in 2 Timothy, Paul reminds Timothy that his faith was lived out in his grandmother and his mother long before it ever really became his own. God's work is relational. He uses ordinary people to point other people to Jesus. And that's why I love my job so much in this role. I get to spend time in CB Kids and hang out with kids at Ignite, and I get to walk alongside adults who are trying to make some of the biggest decisions of their lives. But the truth is, my job is not just about kids and students. My role is about helping all of us become the kind of church where the next generation can clearly see what it looks like to follow Jesus. As Christians in this world, people are watching how we're living our lives. Whether you're a parent or not, or you're 16 or you're 60, someone is watching your life and learning what it means to follow Jesus. They're looking at you and they're watching to see what captures your heart and your time and your attention. And the same is true for the next generation too. They're watching us. And sometimes I truly think we underestimate them. We think that they're only paying attention to games or phones or social media, but they're paying attention to us too. They're watching to see how our faith changes when life gets difficult. They're watching to see if worship is something we do only when life is going well. And they're noticing whether we actually live out what we say we believe on a Sunday. And one thing that I've learned over these last couple years is that they can spot authenticity really well. They know if you're being authentic. But the good news is they aren't looking for us to be perfect. They're looking for us to be real. They need to see what it looks like when a follower of Jesus gets it wrong and asks for forgiveness. They need to see what it looks like when we're anxious and we pray instead of panic. They need to see people who break and maybe get knocked down by life, but then they choose to lean on Jesus to get back up, even if they have no idea how it's going to work out. And it's not because life doesn't hurt, and it's not because they aren't struggling, but it's because they know that Jesus is stronger than anything they're facing. That's what allows us to be able to do any of the things that we do. The next generation needs to see ordinary, imperfect people whose lives revolve around an unchanging Savior. And as I have prayed for our church and the Next Gen ministry this year, one question has kept coming back to me and back to me. And it's, what are we teaching the next generation belongs at the center of life? When they look at us, what are we showing them matters most? Because the greatest gift we can give the next generation isn't another program or curriculum or amazing event. No, the greatest gift that we can give the next generation is a church full of ordinary people whose lives are centered on Jesus. Not just people who sing about him on Sunday, but people who trust him on Monday. Not just people who have perfect lives, but people who know where to turn when life falls apart. Not just people whose hope is built on circumstances, but people whose lives revolve around Jesus. Imagine with me for a second what that would look like. Imagine middle schoolers coming here and discovering that following Jesus is not something we graduate from. It is a lifelong process that we're really all figuring out together. Or high schoolers coming here and seeing marriages with God at the center, reflecting the love of Christ to those around them. Imagine young adults coming here and finding mentors who are going to point them to Jesus long before they point them to worldly success. Or an older generation that is realizing that the best part of their life is not behind them, because each day they have another opportunity to leave a legacy of Jesus with someone else. Imagine every generation here coming together, working together, and pointing each other toward Jesus. That is the kind of church I want us to be. Because that's the kind of church that doesn't just minister to the next generation, it raises them up and shows them how to follow Jesus when the world is so broken. So today, I would like for us to look together a little closer at some of the scriptures that I just mentioned, so we can see how faith is passed from one generation to the next generation. So we're going to start with in Deuteronomy chapter 6. So you could turn there with me, and if you don't have a Bible and you'd like one, go ahead and just raise your hand nice and high. One of our ushers would be happy to bring one to you to follow along. But before we read this passage together, I want to give you a little context, especially if church is something that's new to you or the Bible is new to you. So Deuteronomy is essentially Moses' final message to the people of Israel. God had rescued the Israelites from slavery in Egypt and had been leading them toward the land that he had promised to give them. And after years of wandering in the wilderness, they are now standing at the edge of that promised land. And Moses, the leader God used to bring Israel out of Egypt, knows that he does not get to go into the promised land with them. So before this generation moves forward without him, Moses gathers the people together and he reminds them of what matters most. And he doesn't remind them about their careers or their families, finances, or their future. He begins with something else. And so as we read this together, I want you to notice the order of what he says, because I think it matters a lot for us today. So Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on your doorframes of your houses and on your gates. See, before Moses talks about teaching the children, he talks about the hearts of the people that are standing right there. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. And then he says, these commandments I'm giving to you today to be on your heart. Only after that does he say something about children. And I think that's incredibly important to notice. Because the truth is, before faith is passed on, it has to be personal. And before faith can be ever taught, it has to be lived out. We simply cannot pass on something that we don't possess ourselves. And if Jesus isn't at the center of my life, I can't expect the next generation around me to make him the center of theirs. That's true for parents or grandparents, aunts, uncles, small group leaders, coaches, teachers. Honestly, that's true for every single one of us here today. So this message isn't just for parents or grandparents, and it's not just for people who volunteer in CB Kids or Ignite. This is a message for the whole church. In order to teach the next generation how to put Jesus at the center, we have to first have him at the center of our own lives. And maybe for some of you, that sounds like a big ask. And if that's you, I just want to encourage you today. Because God is not looking for perfection. God is not looking for perfection. He's looking for participation. He's looking for people willing to engage in the process of becoming more like Jesus so they then can tell others more about Jesus. Again, people aren't looking for someone who never struggles. They're looking for someone who knows to turn when they face their struggle. A church full of imperfect people who know that without Jesus, everything else would fall apart. That's who we want Cedarbrook to be. And in Colossians 1:17, Paul describes Jesus in this way. He says, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have supremacy. With these words, Paul is reminding us that Jesus existed before everything else, and that he literally holds the entire universe together. Think about that for a second. The person who holds the entire universe together is offering to be the center of your life. See, Jesus isn't supposed to be another item on your schedule or something we add to our already busy lives. He belongs at the center of everything because he is the one who can hold everything together for us. And this is where the message is going to get a little bit personal, because it requires us to answer one question. What do I place at the center of my life? And I don't mean what you want to be the center of your life. I mean, what do you place at the center of your life? What do people who are around you see is at the center of your life? And if you're wondering, like, how would I even know that, right? Well, it's important that when you're trying to answer that question, you don't just look at what you say you value. Look at what gets your time, what gets your attention, what gets your energy, what gets your trust. That is what you're placing at the center of your life. And listen, I'm guilty of placing other things at the center of my life at times, and I know that I'm not alone in that. For some of us, it's success or financial security, or it's comfort. For some, it's the approval of others. Sometimes it's even our careers or our spouses or our children. And none of those things are necessarily bad. But guys, they were never meant to be the center of our lives. Because the center of our lives has to be something that can hold everything together. And the only one who could truly do that is Jesus. And as I thought about this message and all these things, and I'm a super visual learner, I, in next-gen fashion, thought of a bike wheel. So some of you were wondering when I was going to finally pick this up. But this is the visual for me that helps tie some of these together. So as we look at this wheel together, what holds the wheel together? Is it each one of these little spokes? No. It's the hub. Everything comes together right here, and it's the hub that holds everything together. Every spoke has a meaning and purpose. It has value, but they all depend on one place. And if one of these spokes breaks, the wheel's a little wobbly, right? But if the hub of this wheel breaks, the whole wheel becomes unstable and it loses its purpose. See, you can have a brand new tire and brand new spokes, but without a strong and reliable hub, this wheel cannot function at all. The center is what holds everything together. And guys, this wheel is a lot like our lives. Every single spoke represents our relationships and our families and our jobs and our dreams and our responsibilities and our hopes. And all of those things are important, and they're important parts of our lives. But guys, sometimes they break. And sometimes our relationship falls apart. And sometimes we lose a job, or our plans don't work out. And sometimes we experience disappointment and losses. But when the spoke breaks, it can still have function and meaning and design if it has the hub at the core. When Jesus is at the center, a broken part of our life does not mean our whole life is broken. It may be hurt, it may feel unsteady, but Jesus is still right here. And that's why nothing else should be at the center of our lives, because everything else changes. Nothing else can provide that constant and consistency like Jesus can. Only Jesus can hold it all together, and only Jesus will never change. And maybe you're sitting here and you're thinking, yeah, Rachel, okay, I get it. I get the picture. Jesus is supposed to be at the center. But what does that have to do with the next generation? My answer is everything. Again, because the next generation is learning what it means to follow Jesus by watching how we as the church follow him. Again, it's not about what we tell them, it's about what we show them. So how do we truly know if Jesus is at the center of our lives? How do we know that? Well, if Jesus is truly at the center of your lives, I'm going to be honest, guys, people should be able to see that. People should be able to see that, because while God can be our center and he never changes, when Jesus is at the center, he does change everything around it. So while he may be constant and never changing, he does work and he changes. So if Jesus is truly at the center, that should be changing how you love your family, or how you lead, or how you work, or how you respond when something doesn't go your way, or how you handle disappointment and treat people, and how you face life's uncertainty. See, when Jesus is at the center of your life, it changes you. So the people around you should see it. Again, everything in this world changes. Seasons change, jobs change, kids grow up, relationships change, plans change. That's why those things are terrible sinners. They will change. They will change. But Jesus doesn't. The writer of Hebrews says it this way: Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Following Jesus does not mean everything around us stays perfect. It means that when everything around us is unstable or feels broken, we turn to Jesus, who is unshakable, trusting that he is the one who holds this whole world together and will always be constant for us. That is what spiritual maturity looks like. It isn't having all the answers. It's about depending on and becoming more like Jesus every day, no matter what. And again, I know that some of you are probably out here and you've been hearing this message and you're thinking, yeah, Rachel, that's good for them. But I can't do that. I don't know enough. I don't know how to disciple someone. I don't even have my own faith figured out quite yet. And again, I'm going to give you a little encouragement, because you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be a Bible expert. You don't have to have a perfect life. But you do have to engage and connect and be willing to walk with someone and point them toward Jesus. I promise, as you do that, God will equip you along the way in ways that you never expected. So if you're sitting here thinking that, I want you to know that if you belong to Jesus, you have something to offer. You have something to offer. Maybe your role is teaching and mentoring and serving. Maybe it's simply noticing a teenager who needs someone to believe in them. Or maybe you take some time to sit with a young adult and listen about what they're going through. Or maybe you're an older believer who says, I've walked through this. Let's walk through this together. Guys, we want to be a church where all generations serve one another, learn from one another, and point one another to Jesus. And this is where I'm going to make it really, really practical for you. There are no justs. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that a little bit, right? There are no justs in the kingdom. You may think, I'm just greeting at the door. I'm just helping in nursery. I'm just making coffee. I'm just helping in the tech booth. I'm just staying at home and praying because I simply can't do the things I used to do. I'm just, you fill in the blank. I need you guys to hear me loud and clear today. There are no justs in the kingdom of God. What feels small to you may be incredibly significant to someone else. Every act of faithfulness matters, and every point of connection matters, because faith is passed from person to person over generation and generation. The truth is, you may never know what one conversation or one prayer or one hug or word of encouragement meant to someone. You may never know that the teenager you took 5 minutes to listen to was wondering if anyone still cared. You may never know that showing up week after week gave someone a picture of what faithfulness looks like. See, we don't always get to see the impact, but we are always called to be planting seeds. So don't underestimate your yes. Don't underestimate what God can do through your life, because Jesus is using you to teach other people about him, whether it's up close or far away. Teaching the next generation about Jesus isn't the responsibility of one person. It is our responsibility. God designed the church to carry this message together. In Psalm 78, that I mentioned gives a beautiful picture of what that looks like. Let's read it together. And as I do, again, notice the movement. We will not hide them from our descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children, so that the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born. And then, in turn, they would tell their children, and then they would put their trust in God and not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. Did you catch it? It's one generation tells the next generation about God's faithfulness. And then it continues on to the point, so even children yet to be born would know. I love that picture. But what I love most is that this whole picture, the goal isn't simply that the next generation knows about God. The goal is that they put their trust in God. Cedarbrook, that's our calling. Not to simply fill minds with information, but to point hearts toward Jesus. I don't want our children or students who grew up here remembering that Cedarbrook had great programs and really good events. Those things have value. But if that's all that they remember, we miss the point. I want them to remember the people who prayed with them and knew their names, the people who encouraged them and modeled what trusting Jesus looks like through hard seasons. Because the truth is, long after they forget one of my sermons that I share with them, they will remember the person that made them feel seen and showed them God's love. And I know that's true because when I look at my life, I don't remember necessarily individual sermons. I remember people. For me, it's people like Marty Moeller or Layla Beckerman or Linda Warner, Tim Young, Mark Wilson. And they weren't perfect people. They were people who showed me what it looked like to live your life with Jesus at the center. And again, some of them taught me really close up. And some of them taught me more than they could possibly imagine from afar. But that's what church is supposed to look like. The older encouraging the younger, and the younger reminding the older of a childlike faith. All generations working together to keep Jesus at the center. I'm going to come back to this wheel one more time. Remember, the wheel only works if the center doesn't change. Jesus needs to be the center because he's the only constant. He's the only one that will be the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the truth is, Jesus deserves to be placed at the center of our lives. Not because we're trying to build better lives, but because of what he's already done. He lived a perfect life, but willingly went to the cross to carry our sin. He died the death that we deserved, and he rose from the grave, defeating sin and death forever. And he did all of that so we could be in relationship with him. He deserves to be at the center of our lives. Following Jesus is about surrendering your life to the one who gave his life for you. That's what following Jesus is really about. And today we get to watch people publicly declare that through baptism. How awesome is that? See, baptism doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean that they'll never struggle or have questions. Each person getting baptized today will have a different story, but they're all making the same declaration. Jesus has changed my life, and I want to follow him. And with that, I want Cassidy and Mark and Amelia to come up for me, please.